Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
I was just kind of chuckling. Just before the broadcast started, I was telling our engineer, Blake, what we were going to talk about. So I said, hey, Kyle and I are going to be talking about automotive technology and how a multi-prong approach took out a lot of the older vehicles that you used to see on the road. So I went into a really rapid thumbnail sketch of what we're going to talk about. And I said, does that make sense? And he said, no, but it sounds interesting. Oh, geez. Let me just let everyone know that we are all set, cocked, and locked, and your dial is set correctly to USA Prepares. And we're delighted you're in class today, and it's a special class, one that is not scripted. Not that they are, but this is just going to be free form. And let me tell you what happened. So I worked on our Jeep. We have a farm Jeep. It's a 1994 Jeep Wrangler. Plain Jeep. It's got a hard top. It's got windshield wipers and a heater, and it's got 2 doors. Took out the back seat, put a trailer hitch on it, and we use it around the farm to haul around fence posts and bring feed to the animals and pull trailers around and get wood. And so it's just a utility Jeep. It's a way less expensive version than a 2-seat ATV. Way less expensive, like a third the price. And it has a heater, so it's kind of nice. And we had to replace the camshaft in it, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that happened in a few minutes. So I was mentioning this to Rich Sheben early in the week, and I said, I plan on talking about this. And he said, you need to have a guy on with you who is an expert in automotive mechanics. I said, yeah, I'm going to call him right now. So I picked up the phone, and I called Kyle Harris, who's with us right now. So Kyle, in a previous position, you were the assistant service manager for Chrysler, which owned a Jeep and GMC and Cadillacs. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I was service. They called me assistant service manager, but there was only one guy, and he was over the whole thing, parts and service and everything. And pretty much with service, I handled everything. But yeah, but I've also, just kind of like you, Vince, I've been a gearhead in the sense that, I was buying and fixing up cars and reselling them to make extra money all the way back in high school. Mm-hmm. And, so and then I went to college actually to specifically for automatic transmissions and things like that, and more advanced automotive repair as well. And then I worked as a mechanic for a while, and then I moved up quickly to assistant service manager.
Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about older vehicles. We're going to talk, and I'm talking about the 1960s, 70s, 80s model vehicles and how they seem to have disappeared. And I believe we've connected the dots as to the multi-prong approach to get rid of the older vehicles in favor of the new vehicles. And the new vehicles have two features that we probably don't like. One feature is that 2000 and newer model cars have a satellite tracking system built in. That's one. And the other feature that we don't like, most of us, and that's at USA Prepares, is that you have to bring your vehicle to the dealership in order for them to use the dealership's computer to adjust or make certain adjustments. And even if you want some parts replaced on your vehicle, you have to have the dealership's computer tools to tell the parts that you just put on that they are to be used with your vehicle. So, for example, if you have an engine control computer that fails because the manufacturer of your Dodge Cummins turbo diesel pickup truck mounted that computer on the side of your vehicle in the engine compartment, and it got hot, and over the years it wore out before the rest of the vehicle did, and you find a used one on the internet, and you go, wow, this is great, let me get this used computer, and I'll just stick it on, because it only has maybe 1, 2, or 3 cables and connectors, and you just stick it on the side of your vehicle, bolt it on, it won't work, because it has to be told, your engine has to be told, or the other computers have to be told, that this computer is really part of the system and it's not foreign, and yeah, you can talk to it. Now, the average mechanic will not have that tool nor that computer to do that. So you have to bring it to the dealership. So a $200 computer becomes a $950 repair bill. That's the kind of thing that's going on, and we don't like it. Kyle, do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, actually, and for General Motors, you can go back to 96. Even is when they came out with OBD2, which is Onboard Diagnostic Systems Generation 2, is what that stands for. And the OBD2 system was, each cylinder had its own coil rather than just one coil to fire all 8 cylinders if you had a V8 pickup or something like that. But each cylinder had its own coil, and so that's more things to go out, more control, and like you said, even in '96, if you had that problem, it affected a lot of the other different systems. Best way to put that, I guess. I thought there's a positive side to the OBD2 system. Not in the sense of survival, but in the sense of finding out. It was a smarter computer, for lack of a better term, and there's more modules to control. But when you plug the OBD2 scanner into this, it can tell you directly, okay, coil, say just for instance, coil or cylinder number 2 in your engine is not firing. Whereas the older computers would say you have a misfire, and then you got to try to figure out where it's coming from.
Very, very good point. And so, class, here's something that you may want to consider doing for yourself. And this is something that I've done. And I can't think of anything that I've recommended that you consider doing that I have not done or would not do. So, what Kyle's saying is absolutely right. If you have one of these 1996 and newer vehicles, and we have a 1994 truck that has a General Motors truck that has an OBD2 scan port on it. It's a connector underneath the dash, typically, and it has a lot of holes in it. It's a D-shaped, kind of like a big video cable connector. It's like that, maybe 1.5 inches long, and maybe a 1/2 inch wide. Maybe a little bit wider than that. And you plug in this cable attached to a handheld scanner, about the size of the handset on a telephone, if you will, about that size. And you turn on the ignition, and the computer will communicate with this scanning tool, and it will read on a display what it has found as error codes on your car's computer. And then you can use those error codes to further diagnose what you want to do to fix the problem. And so I bought one of these tools. I bought it on the internet. I bought it on eBay. And I paid about $32, $33, $34, something like that for it, shipped without tax. And I have that with us. And, people are, believe it or not, class, people are showing up at our farm with problems with their car, and they're asking us to fix them. I'm telling you a couple different things in this little side trip we're taking. Number one, they know that they have a problem because a light came on their dashboard that said check engine, And they know that we have the tool, and they want to know what it is, and whether they, should consider having it fixed, or whether it's something that we can reset. Another thing I'm telling you is that cars are showing up with people behind the wheel to our farm because they think that we know more about what's wrong with their vehicles and can fix them better than the other auto mechanics around town who are in the business of fixing vehicles can. What I'm saying is they don't trust the typical mechanics as much as they trust us, which is kind of an interesting compliment, but it's presented another problem because we're a bunch of farmers. But they think that we know more because we seem to have the ability to fix the vehicles, and they don't trust the typical oil change places, brake change places, exhaust change places, transmission change places, and they do trust the dealers, but they don't want to go to the dealers because the dealers are way, way, way more expensive. So that's just a little side trip, and you may want to consider getting your own scan tool. And you don't have to spend a lot of money. You can get one for about $35 or less shipped on eBay. But read all the descriptions, learn what you can before you buy it. You can spend more money if you go to Harbor Freight, but you don't need to spend that much, in my opinion. Any comments on that, Kyle?
Sure. Yeah. It's important to be able to scan these things, but it's really important to have books to be able to take that code and turn to a page in a book where you can see where it's located, whatever module or whatever problem it is, or some things require special tools or tools that you might have to build in order to access some of these things, these parts and pieces. They shoehorn them in there, you know what I mean? They really put them so they're very difficult sometimes to get to. So here's one other thing that this is having to do with survival and preparedness and stuff like that. So if the Schumer were to hit the fan and you're driving one of these newer vehicles and all of a sudden your check engine light comes on, but the engine, I'll finish this up after the break.
Yeah, I can tell this is a really good point, class. And I have a feeling it's going to end up with, when you have this OBD2 scan tool, why don't you take it with you? Think about that. We'll be right back. Kyle Harris is with us, and we're talking about automobile engines. And class, I can almost guarantee that you'll learn something that you didn't know during this broadcast. I can almost guarantee it. Now, that's including shade tree mechanics. So even if you work on your own vehicles, we're going to share some tips, tricks, and thoughts that are probably, well, some of them may be new to you. So you may want to consider staying with us, even if, we're talking about things that either you know about or are foreign to you. I still think it's good information, and to be preparedness-minded, you might want to share this broadcast with others. So, Kyle, you were talking about the OBD2 Onboard Diagnostics version 2 scanner. I mentioned that I bought one that was about $32, $4, shipped from and tax exempt, untaxed on the internet, out of state. And please continue. As you travel, you had some thoughts about that. Yeah,
sure. So this has to do with, say it's a survival situation, and your check engine light, now, you got to remember something. If something goes haywire in your newer vehicle, most of the time, what I have found, I'm talking 75% of the time, it has to do with emission controls, whether that's your O2 sensors or something along those lines, throttle positions sometimes, little things, okay, and your check engine light comes on. And say you don't have your OBD2 scanner with you, just for curiosity or to pose a problem here. So your check engine light comes on, but your engine and your car is running fine. You have a chance to pull over, kind of look. The thing is, you lift the hood, you look over. There's no hoses, there's no belts, there's no problem with any of that. But your check engine light's on, and you can't figure out why. Well, people have to understand that in your exhaust pipe, depending on which vehicle you have, there's one or two of these little tiny sensors in the exhaust pipe, and they're called an oxygen sensor, or O2 sensor. And they have very, very tight parameters of what is acceptable for exhaust going out the tailpipe. And they want you to, in order to not pollute, they want you to swap them out immediately if you have your, if that's what's the matter with it. So, but your engine can run fine for a long, long time with the check engine light on if the engine's running fine. So let's just say you were in a bad place and you needed to get out of there. And your check engine light's on. You can drive it as long as the engine and everything is running fine. You can drive it, and your engine isn't overheating, or there's nothing wrong with your charging system or anything like that. So I'm prefacing all of these questions. Just be careful. Just realize this as well. Okay, your check engine light is on. So that means that anything else that happens to your engine, this car is not going to tell you anything bad that's gone wrong, because it's already got a code that says check your engine already on. Now, when you get home, say you get home and you've got your scanner and you go in there, you might find just an O2 sensor, or you might find O2 sensor, cam sensor. Well, cam sensor, that's kind of a serious thing. So you're going to have to start digging into your books and figure out what's wrong and how to repair these different things as you go. I like, you can get these Haynes or Chilton manuals and things like that, but if I'm going to have a vehicle for very long, and I know this is the one, I try to find an actual factory repair manual, and they're around 35 to 65, sometimes a little more. And they're usually not some small book. They're like 2 to 5 volumes, like an encyclopedia. It goes from one end of your car to the other. We can finish up on the other side here.
Yeah. Good information. And we're going to talk more about the scanners and what to do when we come back. Yeah, we're talking about cars today and trucks. And Kyle is mentioning the scanner and what it means when you see the check engine light, and typically how it means something with the emission controls, the sensors in the exhaust system before and after the catalytic converter, called the oxygen sensors. And he was talking about other parts of the fuel system that might trigger a warning light to come on, engine warning light. And then when that comes on, if something else happens after that, that's serious, real serious, you won't know because the warning light has already come on that says check your engine. Kyle, please continue.
Okay, I just want to make one little differentiation here now. I want people to really understand that the check engine light is not a oil light or something along that lines. Because if you don't have oil pressure gauge on your car, and all it has is like what I call idiot lights. They come on instantly. Say you don't check your oil forever and you run out of oil or something, that oil pressure light will come on. If that happens, you need to pull over as instantly as you possibly can, because that oil light only comes on when the pressure in your oil pumping system inside the engine, if I remember correctly, it varies a little bit from maker to maker, but it's somewhere between 3 and 5 pounds of pressure. So by then, the chances that you haven't done some kind of damage to your engine is pretty low. the chances are that you did do some kind of damage to your engine. Because normal engine oil pressure runs anywhere from 25 to 80 pounds. So, depending on, what the RPM of your engine. So that's just something to think about. Just make sure I'm not telling you it's okay to drive if your oil pressure light comes on or your coolant light comes on or something along those lines. I'm specifically talking about the check engine light. And a lot of times on these newer cars, what it has is a little tiny picture of an engine, and it's usually in yellow, little yellow light that'll come on. And again, I'm speaking in terms of a situation. If you're in a blizzard and your check engine light comes on, you're not gonna pull over and die, because if your engine's running fine, you're gonna get out of the blizzard, or if it's a worse situation, to physical harm to you, the car is way secondary compared to your life.
Yeah.
So,
Kyle, when you talk about the check engine light, that's an amber-colored or yellow-colored light, which means caution, just like a traffic light, caution. Now, the oil light, if that comes on and says oil, that's red. That means stop. And
yep.
I know this for a fact because we have a friend who was driving a pickup truck that was owned by another member of the family. And he was coming to see us. And he was on the interstate, and the oil light came on. And he thought, okay, that means check the oil. So he drove to the next exit, pulled off, checked the oil. There was no oil on the dipstick, got some oil. And the bottom line is we had to put a new engine in that truck.
Yep.
So, yeah, when you see that oil light, that doesn't mean check the oil. That means it's past check the oil point. And now when you check the oil, you're probably going to find out that there's something wrong with the lubrication system, and your engine has already had serious engine wear or experienced a catastrophic failure. That's how I read that red oil light. Is that what you see also?
Absolutely. Which kind of brings up another point. I know you do it, and I know I do it. Every vehicle I have a little cardboard box. I'm not sure exactly how you do it, but this is how I do it. I have a little cardboard box in the back of every vehicle I own. And in that box is, they're all automatic transmissions. Okay, so in that box I carry 2 quarts of oil, of whatever I'm running. If it's the summertime, I'm running 1030. And I don't care what the car calls for. If it calls for 530, I personally don't care. I'm going to run a little thicker oil in it in the summertime. Wintertime, 530 is great. This is just me, my own particular bent. Okay, I know for a fact that oil pressure is a little higher and it lubricates better if a little bit tiny thicker the oil is. You might lose a half a mile per gallon, but that's, in my way of thinking, this is the way I do it. So I carry in this box 2 quarts of oil, 1 quart of automatic transmission fluid, 1 small can of brake fluid. I carry a 4-way lug wrench because I don't like using the factory-built lug wrenches in order to change a tire. I carry a full-size spare. There's little tiny things that you can, once you learn how to use them, I carry an extra gallon of windshield washer fluid back there in that as well. I carry a pair of dumper cables, different things that you might need as you travel. So there's things, if your brakes, let's just jump to that real quick. If your brakes, you have to go all the way to the floor, but it still stops. The reason that it still stops when you go all the way to the floor is because there's a secondary system in your master cylinder, which is when you push the brakes, that's the first place it goes, that can apply a tiny amount of brake fluid to the brakes to stop you in an emergency in case you have something wrong with your brake system. So if it goes all the way to the floor, don't try it 2 or 3 times, because one of these times it's not going to work, and you're going to just keep going right on down. So if you push that brake pedal and it goes to the floor but still stops, pull over and call a tow truck. Do not try to limp that or drive it somewhere, because that is that's really dangerous. That means you've got a hole in a brake line, you've got a master cylinder failure, you've got all kinds of different things that can happen. So that's just one little tiny rabbit trail, but it has to do with being prepared. And so these are just little things. Go ahead and elaborate on what you do.
Okay. Well, a lot of what I do is what you do. And in one of the vehicles, I will carry the OBD2 scanner. But I only have one of them, so I can't put them in all the vehicles. I will carry, as you do, a 12-ounce plastic bottle of brake fluid. And it'll either be .3 or .4. DOT stands for Department of Transportation. And there's a grade of oil, either synthetic or non-synthetic, and it'll be either .3 or .4 in most cases. So when you look at under your hood, you'll see whether your master cylinder says DOT3 or DOT4, so you can get the right oil. And brake fluid. And how expensive is it? A couple dollars. So it's not a lot of money. So yes, I carry a 12-ounce container of brake fluid, and you want to keep the cap tight. You do not want moisture to get into your brake fluid. I carry a quart of engine oil. I carry a quart of automatic transmission fluid. I carry some bottles of water. Now, these would be drinking bottles of water that I carry. And the reason I say drinking water is I don't know who's going to need the water more. I don't know if it's going to be us in the people in the vehicle if we break down, or whether it's going to be the radiator or the windshield washer. So I can put that drinking water in the windshield washer fluid bottle. I can put it in the radiator once it's safe to put it in there. And by the way, you never open the radiator cap when the engine's hot. And when the engine is warm and cooled down to just warm, what I do is I take a towel, or if I were in an emergency and had a shirt, I might take my shirt off or my jacket and put that over the radiator cap to prevent me from being scalded when I open the radiator cap. I also carry SAE, which would be the American size sockets and wrenches. I carry metric sockets and wrenches. I carry screwdrivers, a flashlight, a blanket. And a blanket is for if it's really cold and I need a blanket to stay warm, I've got one. If I need to get under the vehicle for a failure, I can put the blanket under the vehicle and get on the blanket to work on it. And I carry booster cables as well. And when I change the oil or service the vehicle, I will cut off the top of the box of the oil filter if it has a box. And it'll say, Fram, whatever the oil filter number is. And then on the back of that, I will write the date, the mileage, that I changed the oil, how many quarts, what brand of oil, what grade of oil. And I will write that on the back, and I'll put that in order in this small Ziploc bag that goes in the glove compartment. So that's how I kind of keep track of maintenance, and that's what I carry in our trunks or truck toolboxes.
Yeah.
That's right. So very much what you do, Kyle. And
I carry a gallon. Yeah, I carry a gallon, actually, also. I forgot about that. I carry a gallon of antifreeze that's pre-mixed to 50-50.
Right.
And what I do, I don't really have water back there unless I know we're taking a trip. Then I'll do it. I'll put water back in there. But the other thing that I have also found that works really well, especially if it's all you're dealing with is changing a tire and you happen to be sort of halfway dressed up, is I picked up a chunk of carpet, and I cut a piece of carpet out that's about 3 foot wide by about 5 feet long, because that's what I can lay down on if I need to, or kneel on, and it gives me a little insulation from the ground if it's cold, and it just keeps me from getting dirty if it's just sitting in the back there and it rolls up and I put a piece of baling twine around it, and that's what I use as well. So it might help people.
Yeah. Now, we do the same thing a little differently. We actually cut the carpet to fit the trunk to protect the trunk carpeting that comes with the vehicles. Or if it's an SUV, we take some older carpet that matches the color of the interior, cut it to shape, and it becomes a protector for the factory carpeting in the SUV. We'll be right back. Kyle Harris is with us, and we're talking about vehicles. I want to share a quick story with you. So my son handed me something this morning. He handed me a little tester. And I'll tell you a little bit about what this is after I tell you the short story. So he and his friend decided to take a winter trip and out of state for a couple days. And they were telling me that they were going to take this trip. And I said, okay. What vehicle are you going to take? And he said, well, we'll probably take our ML320, which is a 1999 Mercedes all-wheel drive. Or can we maybe borrow your Mercedes 2000 vintage E430 all-wheel drive? Sure, it's fine with me. I'd like you to avoid the salt so it doesn't, trash the E430, but the ML, that's got some rust on it, so it makes sense. The tires are good. And what they decided to do was take the other person's truck, an F-350 Ford V10. Made no sense to me. Like, why would you take a V10 when you can take a V6? But they said, well, it's heavier and, it might snow. And by the way, the other family, they service their vehicle all the time. They have these really good guys. They keep it, up to date and serviced and well maintained. It's really good. And I said, well, it can't be any better maintained than we maintain our vehicles. Impossible. Can't be done. Well, so they took the F-350 V10 and they were out of state. And the check engine light came on, and the truck wouldn't go over 20 miles an hour, and it was sleeting and snowing, and temperatures were really, really cold. So I got a call. Hey, Dad, here's what's happening. And so I said, well, I guess you probably ought to bring it to find a dealer. Well, they couldn't find a dealer. Finally, they were able to find a dealer that would look at it the next morning, and the dealer said, oh, okay, we know what's wrong. Put it on the computer. You need new ignition wires, you need new spark plugs, and you need a new exhaust gas recirculation valve, $3,000. I said, that's nuts. Here's what you do. So you go to AutoZone, and you buy a tester. And the tester that you buy looks like a pen. And inside, it's got a aluminum nose on this pen that fits over the spark plug wire. It has a neon light on it, and the other end is aluminum that you hold. And you can put it over each spark plug wire, and it will light up as the spark fires from that particular spark plug wire. And you can tell whether you've got good spark plugs or not based on the intensity of the tester. And that'll, for $10, $8.99, that will plus tax, that'll tell you whether, $8.99 plus tax, that'll tell you whether your spark plugs are firing or not. You don't even have to take them out. And so they got this tested, and they said they're all good. I said, okay. So you probably have a fuel system problem, and you probably have a plugged up fuel filter. You probably have maybe even freezing in the fuel line, and I think that's going to be the problem. Well, what they did was the other family said, well, we'll just bring out a truck and a trailer, and we'll pick it up, and you can take, we'll put another vehicle on the trailer, we'll bring it out to you. It's like a 500-mile trip. That's what they did. And next morning, they started this truck up. It was warmer, and it drove fine. And so it probably was frozen water in the fuel line because they probably got some fuel mixed with water because of the sleet and snow and so forth. And what I'm saying is, so just because the dealership says that you've got all these problems with your vehicle and just because you're out of state and they've got a gun to your head, they may not be telling you the truth. So that brings you back to the OBD2 scanner for $35 or so. You get that and bring that with you. And you may want to get one of these spark plug testing tools that I talked about. Kyle, any comments on that?
That's excellent. Very excellent, Vince. And I happen to think of one other thing. This happened one time in my life. Actually, we'll cover it after the break.
Yeah. And you know what, class, when you're traveling, the dealerships really think they've got you by the throat. They really do. And they may not be replacing the parts that you need. So you need to know a little bit in advance about how to use some of the tools that we're talking about. Kyle and I will be right back. Everyone all set? Cocked, locked, hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Kyle Harris is with us, and we're talking about cars. And I believe that we have connected some of the dots in why you don't see many older vehicles on the road. It's a multi-pronged attack on getting rid of these older cars, and one of them was called Cash for Clunkers. In 2009, the government corporation decided they would get rid of these older cars, and what they would do is pay people to bring the cars to dealerships where they would trade them in for new vehicles, I should say, and that would spur economic growth by people buying new cars that they didn't need, by giving them incentives to bring in their older cars and paying extra above the trade-in value for cars that were older. And here's what they did. They did the most amazing thing. The government corporation required the dealerships to blow up the engines, literally destroy the engines. They'd take off the air cleaner and they'd rev the engine up. One guy'd be in the driver's seat, vehicle in park, engine revving. Another guy would pour this silica liquid down the throat of the carburetor, and it would seize up the engine. Absolutely lock it up. And that's what our government did to get vehicles off the road. And I believe one of the reasons they did that was to spur sales, and the car dealers loved it. The car manufacturers loved it. And that forced you to buy a car that would be smaller, probably, better fuel mileage, probably, lighter weight, probably, less crash-worthy, probably, and one that certainly had satellite tracking and required the manufacturer's computer in order to service it. That's what they did, in my opinion. Any comments, Kyle, on just the 2009 Cash for Clunkers?
Yeah, the whole thing was so aggravating and maddening to anybody with just a half a drop of common sense. They've done this our government has done this kind of stupid stuff even in the last Depression. They were killing hogs and burning oranges and burying oranges and stuff when people were starving to death. And it all has to do with two governments. We have one out here that's the minor part of the government that you vote for, and the other part that really controls everything, whether people want to understand it or not, is the moneyed interests. That's who owns and controls this country. I want to jump back just real quick for a second, Vince, because this happened one time to me, and I couldn't hardly believe it, but it was true. Most of your little oil light on your dash, and again, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here, but that little oil light on your dash measures oil pressure, okay? And oil pressure can be affected by a lack of oil in the engine, or it can be affected by the oil pump. One time I had a lady call in to the dealership that I was working there and said she was somewhat savvy in the sense she says, my oil light's on, but I checked the dipstick and I still have oil, but the engine will still run. Well, the reason she had oil is because the oil pump itself went out. So when that oil light comes on, it doesn't matter if that oil light's on and you get out, you pull over and you pull the dipstick and there's still oil in there, do not drive it because you will tear it up. Because if there's not pressure, that pump's not producing pressure and circulating it in the engine, it will ruin the engine. But like I said, most of the time, 99.99% of the time, it's because somebody didn't check their oil and they ran it out of oil. But sometimes, every once in a long, long while, like I said, I've only seen this once, and I'm 61 years old, so I've only seen this one time in my life, but it can happen.
Yes. Dan in Texas, you're on with Kyle Harris and me, Vin Finelli. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. Just wanted to ask Vince, I heard him almost 2 months ago on the NutriMedical show, and he was talking about taxes, irs.gov, I think number 17, where you can read a lot of information.
Publication.
Just wanted to see if
yes, publication 17.
Yeah, I just wanted to find out what website do you recommend just to file your taxes on site and follow that guide number 17.
I don't recommend filing taxes online. I recommend using paper copies. And the reason, and we're off topic today, so with this call, but I will answer your question briefly. And if you'd like to call in, on another day, we can spend more time on it. And I understand this is tax season. Bottom line is, I always file paper documents because I write notes on the paper documents. I don't necessarily use the Internal Revenue Services forms. Now, I may make up my own form, and I may take a lined sheet of notebook paper. I may take a plain white piece of copier paper, and I may write what I believe their form that they'd like me to use, the number of their form is, and I may write what information I think they might want. And it may not agree with exactly what their form wants me to tell them. So, I try my best. I really work hard at it, but I do not file electronically, and I will not. I will not. And they can't make me. Not yet. So, that's my answer. Publication 17 is what I recommend you download, read, print, and then when you print it, then you can write on those pieces of printer paper the notes that you have that refer to the decisions that you make. So why you've taken certain deductions, what you think those paragraphs mean in their documentation. Okay? So I would keep that. And so if you get audited, that you can pull that out and say, oh yeah, I downloaded this, I printed it off on that tax year, here's what you said, here's what I believe that you mean. What did you mean? Because this is what it means to me. And why do I say that? Because I have my notes written on the printed pages. I've written my interpretation of what you said in your words on the IRS document, publication 17. Does that make sense?
Well, thank you. Yeah, and your website, USA Prepares, is there anything on there that talks about taxes that I can research?
You can go to the archives, but they're not the GCN or RBN, Republic Broadcasting Archives, but you won't be able to find probably it that way. The best way is to go to the Ron Gibson channel on YouTube and search on Vincent Finelli, Finelli, comma, extreme space, tax space, deductions. There are 7 one-hour broadcasts, maybe even 8, where I talk about extreme tax deductions and how I interpret what the IRS says. Now, I have been audited at least 10 times in the past. Be prepared. If you do the things that I talk about, you may be audited. Now, if you don't want to do them, you're going to pay too much in taxes. If you do the things that I do, then you might get audited. But that's okay, because I even teach you how to be prepared for the audit. And the audit's a really cool thing. It's war. And it's kind of a nice friendly war. It's you against them. They want to steal your money and you want to keep it in your wallet. So it's a game of chess. It's a game of war. I believe they're on commission. They want to steal from you. They get rewarded on the amount of theft that they garner from you as IRS agents, and it's your responsibility to not let them do that. Okay? So I teach you how to do that, but bear in mind that you have to do your own research. And don't come to me if you get audited and say, hey, I got audited. I did what you did and I got audited. Well, I did what I did and I got audited too, but I win the audits. I win the audits because I use their rules to my advantage. I play by their rules. And they can't say, well, you cheated, you lied, you stole, because it's not true. I can prove everything I say in documents when I fill out a tax return, including depreciation. Now, some of it's vague, and some of it's up to interpretation. And I interpret it the way I think they mean it. which really means in my favor. And they have to prove to me that I'm wrong, and they can't. Okay?
All right. Hey, that's some great information. I'm on his YouTube right now, and God bless and keep up the good work.
Hey, thanks so much. Okay, a little off topic. We're talking about and when you buy a used vehicle class, I looked up on eBay. I've got it in front of me. I bought a scanner called a Maxi Scan KW808. KW808, $33.95 shipped. And that's the one I have. It's kind of red, and it's got a rubberized case and a cable. It tells me pretty much everything I need to know. $33.95 is the current price on eBay. Let's see. So that, before you buy a used car, let me tell you a little short story. I wanted to buy a used Mercedes, 1996, a diesel, E300. The best car I've ever owned is this. It's not the most sophisticated. It's not the most comfortable. It's not the most feature heavy. It's a plain Jane basic E300 mid-size Mercedes diesel, non-turbocharged. 30 miles to the gallon around town. 47 is the maximum we ever got on the highway. It's impressive. I paid $3,000 for it. The guy said, "Well, I've got some problems with the glow plugs. When you go to start it, it really, really runs rough." Nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted it because of that. And he didn't want to pay to have it fixed, probably maybe $1,000 in labor at Mercedes to get these glow plugs replaced. So he said that's what it needed. And I said, okay. Hey, would it be okay if I've got my OBD2 scanner here in my pickup truck? Would it be okay if I just plugged it in? Would you mind? He said, no, go ahead. And I verified that exactly was the problem, that it did have a glow plug failure. And I know that glow plugs can be had for about $19 a piece. It has 6 of them. Wow, what a great deal. So I verified before the purchase that I knew what was wrong with this car. And also when I go to buy a car, I bring my son with me, and he'll drive the vehicle, and I'll follow him. I want to see if it goes down the road like a dog, sideways. I check for all kinds of things, alignment, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we come back. Kyle Harris is with us. Kyle, I was working on our 1994 Jeep. We probably have a fleet of vehicles here at the farm, and we have some Dodge, Chevrolet, Mercedes. I'm trying to think what else we have. We have some, vintage cars. And so we do a lot of work on cars. And I heard this tapping of the Jeep engine. We bought it used, and it's a 1994, a couple 100,000 miles on it. Compression was good. Transmission was, everything was okay. I need to replace a front wheel hub. I need to replace some brakes. I need to replace some transmission, cooling lines, insignificant stuff. But the tapping of the transmission was a little bit bigger job than just normal maintenance. And so I ordered a camshaft on the internet, standard grind, which means it's not a performance camshaft. That's a standard factory specification camshaft, and new lifters, and of course the associated gaskets. Pulled out the camshaft, and it was like a half a day job, maybe a day, if you put all the time that we put into it over a couple days. And I mic'd the camshaft, which means I took a micrometer out and I measured the lobes, and I compared the new and the old, and there was significant wear. It was even wear, but it was worn out past where I would like it to be. So the engine performance really suffered. And I was thinking about that. How could that happen? Because the compression was great, the cylinders are great, the rings are great, the pistons are great, the bearings, the rod bearings, the main bearings, all the camshaft bearings, everything's great, but not the camshaft lobes and the lifters. They were worn. So I started thinking about why. And what I found out was it tied to the 1974 problem with Ford Pinto engines, a 2.3-liter four-cylinder engine. And Ford was making statements, our camshafts were wearing out. And the word on the street was the camshafts were soft. meaning the ductile iron, the iron was not as hard as needed to be, and the cams wore out prematurely. But then Ford later on said, if you use this oil, this new improved oil, with more anti-wear additives, the camshafts will be fine. So then it was, there's a soft camshaft, but no, it really wasn't, because it was really the oil. And that's what happened to our camshaft on our Jeep. So what really caused the failure was the new oil, the SAE 5W30, with the nomenclature service grade N, as in Nancy. And what happened was, in the 1930s, oil was classified by the American Petroleum Institute as a service grade, which would be engine oil was classified two ways. Service grade C, as in combustion ignition, diesels. They don't have spark plugs. Or S for spark plugs. And so there was the first grade of oil was called A, SA, for gasoline engines. And then it was improved with anti-wear additives, and it's called SB. And then it was improved with more additives, SC, SD, E, F, G, H, and so forth, all the way up to N. And what we were told over the years, the decades, was, if you had a service grade A oil called for by your automotive, the manufacturer of your vehicle, if it called for SA, you could put SB in it, because SB is better than SA. And where do you find this? Well, it's on the label, on the bottle, or the can, or the jug of oil. It says API, SA, SB, SC. Well, the current one is SN. And we were told for years, decades, that if your oil, if it calls for SB, you could put SC in it, because SC is newer and improved. And if it called for SC, you could put SD in it, because it was newer and improved, and so forth. Well, that all stopped with the additives that are required for the older engines with the latest version of motor oil. It's been downgraded in terms of anti-wear properties and additives. And Kyle and I will tell you what that means when we come back. It's complicated, but we're going to tell you why your engines are wearing out. Kyle Harris is with us. And class, I've never heard anybody talk about this particular topic on the air. Never. And so, here we go. Back in up to 1930, API, American Petroleum Institute service classification for passenger car engine oil, was called SA up until 1930. Up until 1951, it was called SB. And it was improved further up until 1967. SC grade was used, and then SD was used until 1971. SE was used up until 1979. SF was used until 1988, and then 1993 was SG, 1996 was SH, 2001 was SJ, 2004 SL, and then 2011 was SM. Now the newest, the current one, is called SN, as in Nancy. Here's the problem. If you have an older vehicle, like a 1980, 1970, 1960, or earlier vintage, they have typically flat tappet camshafts. I'm talking about V8s, I'm talking about 4-cylinders, I'm talking about a lot of the older engine designs. Now the design. Now you can have a newer production year with an older design that has a flat tappet camshaft. And if you use the newest oil, grade SN, API service classification SN, you will experience greater camshaft wear. And you'll be stuck doing what I did, which was replace the camshaft and the tappets, also known as lifters. So it's a big problem. Now, how do you know about this? Well, they have what's called the donut on the label. And it's this round round icon, if you will, and it has the API service classification. It'll be SASB, and so forth, all the way up to SN. It'll have the viscosity. It'll say SAE 5W30, and it may say something called like resource conserving, which means a thinner oil that Kyle was talking about, which you get better mileage. But the point is, if you use the latest and greatest oil in your older vehicle, you may damage the engine and cause a catastrophic failure, or cause that engine to wear out prematurely with the latest and greatest new oil. Absolutely, positively true. Kyle, do you have any comments on that?
That's absolutely true, Vince. If you have older vehicles, like you were saying, 60s, 70s, 80s, or, below that, below 60s, even 50s, but if you have those, you really need to use some kind of an oil additive with these new oils. It's the same thing that's going on with our gasoline. The gasoline is junk. Even if you get the non-ethanol premium, it won't last longer than about 30 to 60 days sitting there till it starts going bad. And if you get a gasoline that has ethanol in it, it starts separating from the ethanol, starts separating from the gasoline. If it's sitting in 2 weeks, the ethanol starts separating, and then the ethanol starts absorbing moisture from the air because it's an alcohol. Okay, and then so you don't. There's a couple of ways, some things we can talk about as you go on here. I just had one other little quick point I want to make sure people understand or think about. This has to do with preparedness again. So what's the one thing that most people forget other than checking the air pressure in their tires? Okay, that's usually, I think that's number one. But number two thing that they forget is when did they last change their oil? Because if they've got an older rig, if they didn't write it down, they're not meticulous with notes. So one of the easiest ways I have found to be able to make sure you remind yourself is I take a little tiny bit of masking tape and I write OC, which means oil change, okay, and then the next mileage that it's due. Okay, so I have 2 Toyotas, and those engines are absolutely amazing. My wife's little Toyota has like 189,000 miles on it, and that oil at 3,000 miles looks brand new. So I run that oil for about 4,500 miles till it just starts to turn brown, and then I change it. The same thing is true on my Toyota engine that I've got on my Toyota car. And then I have an old Subaru that has 230,000 miles on it. Now, that oil needs to be changed. It's dirty after 3,000 miles, so I change it. And at this different intervals for these engines. But one of the additives that I really like, and it's getting hard to find, I don't know why, but Napa used to carry it all the time, and it was called Prolong, P-R-O, kind of a dash, and then L-O-N-G. And it was an incredible oil additive that would actually penetrate the metal. It was expensive, and it's probably why they didn't sell too much of it. But anyway, that's an excellent additive. The other additive that I really like is called Marvel Mystery Oil. And you can put that in your gas tank. You can put it in your oil when you do it. I have an old 1977 plow truck that has a 400 Chevy V8 in it. And so when I change the oil in that truck, I always put a quart of Marvel Mystery Oil in it with 530-weight motor oil, because the only time that truck is ran is when there's snow on the ground and I'm having to plow. So it's only a winter truck. I might start it up 2 or 3 times a year, during the summer to make sure everything's okay starting and everything's running good. The other thing I do is there's an additive that goes in the gas tank called sea foam, S-E-A, like the sea, and foam. And I will put 1 ounce per gallon of gasoline with non-ethanol gasoline in that old plow truck for the summer. Like I said, I might fire it up. I'll fill it up and then put plenty of sea foam in there to cover it. I don't go over 1 ounce per gallon. And I have reasons for that. But anyway, 1 ounce per gallon, it will preserve the gasoline, And it also makes it so that if I need to start this thing in the wintertime, and I don't start it for maybe once every month and a half, it'll go out there and it'll fire right off. That seafoam is amazing additive. I really like it.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. They took the sulfur and they took the zinc out of the oil, which protected it. They took the sulfur out of the diesel fuel, which protected your injector pump because it's a lubricant. But zinc is what's known as a sacrificial metal. If you have a piece of steel out here and it is coated with zinc, okay, and it's exposed to the elements, and you get a scratch on it, okay, if that zinc will over time actually fill in, it'll almost flow together to cover that scratch. It's called a sacrificial metal. And when they took the zinc and the sulfur out of the oil, it caused a much more engine wear to your vehicles. So they push you into having to buy these additives. Anyway, after you, sir.
Okay. Well, I'm looking at a website, and it's Advanced Auto Parts website, and it says ZDDP motor oil additive, engine oil additives that work. And it says engines wear out. It's an unfortunate truth, but they're talking about the engine oil supplement called ZDDP. And what is it? Well, zinc dialkylid thiophosphate. So to make it easier to say, ZDDP. And it has been removed from the current version SN, service SN oils, mostly removed. There's a little bit left. And it's because it's been reported to have destroyed the catalytic converters or make them less efficient. So to preserve the catalytic converter life, which is a device to reduce air pollution, at least that's how it's being touted, our vehicles have had the zinc and phosphorus removed as additives in the engine oil. And according to this article, that if you have a 1990 or newer vehicle, you don't need as much zinc or phosphorus. If you have a 1990 or older vehicle, you do. And they're absolutely right. But you can't get it in common oil. So what do? You can buy additives and add them to your oil to increase the zinc and phosphorus content of your motor oil. Or, and that's a good way, and I can't recommend one because I haven't done any testing. But here's what I did do. When I rebuilt the Jeep, I coated the camshaft lobes entirely, the entire lobe surface and the bearing surfaces, with a molybdenum disulfide anti-wear material. It's black. And I coated the lobes with that before I put the camshaft in. Then I poured oil down the valleys where the lifters were, motor oil, for lubricant, on the additional lubricant on the camshaft. And I lubricated the cams as well on the lifters, soaked the lifters in engine oil. And then I added STP. Now, I don't like to add STP motor treatment to engines, but I use it when I rebuild an engine, and I use it as an assembly lubricant because it's thick and it has ZDDP in it. I contacted STP, and they do not tell you how much ZDDP, but they claim it's in there. So that's what I used, and it worked fine. So the molybdenum disulfide, and as a grease, if you will, and also the STP as an assembly lubricant is what I used to preserve the life of the cam. And now, when you break in a new camshaft, there's a procedure, and that is, and this is going to sound horrible, but this is what you have to do. Along with the lubrication I just mentioned, you need to prime the oil pump. That means you take a drill, if you can, and you insert a tool that you probably have to make, kind of like a screwdriver bit, and you spin the oil pump up to get oil into the oil galleries and pressurize the engine with oil before you start it up. Then you start your engine up. And it's too complicated to tell you exactly how to do this, but then you start your engine up and you run it at 1,500 to 2,000 RPM almost immediately, within a second or two of starting it. And that you do for 20 minutes. And you vary the RPM to break in the camshaft. So I walked into AutoZone near the less than a 50-mile round trip from the farmhouse, and I needed a couple parts. And just as I walked in the door, I heard this middle-aged woman from halfway across the store say, "Hi, can I help you?" I said, yeah. I was doing my Columbo. I said, ZDDP. What can you tell me about it? She said, "What is it?" I said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said, can I help you?" And so she said, "Well, let's look it up." So she got on the internet. She said, "Oh, it's an additive. It's an additive to engine oil." I said, "Yeah, that's right." And so she had no clue. Now, they had engine oil additives with ZDDP, but she didn't know what it was. Now, there's a point. I mean, I had some fun with her, it was kind of painful for her and for everyone around who kind of watched this. But I was trying to teach her that they need to pay attention to what they're doing. And they need to know their products if they're going to act like, if they wear the uniform and act like they know what they're doing, they really need to know a little bit more about what they're doing. And it's not like they didn't have this product. There's a whole shelf full of this stuff. Anyway, that was a little side story. But if you have one of these engines, like in an ATV, four-wheeler, motorcycle, lawnmower, generator, these simpler types of engines, I believe that you should consider using something other than the current, latest, greatest oils that you get at the Chinese factory outlet, which are labeled SN in the donut on the label on the back of the can or jar or jug or bottle. And you can use ATV oil. Now, it's way more expensive. ATV oil by Valvoline sold at the Chinese factory outlet is $4.44 a quart plus tax. But it's different. It is not the same oil as the same weight oil that would be for a gasoline automobile. It's different. It has more additives. It's the downgraded version of the SN, meaning it has more additives. That's what I believe you want, especially if you have an air-cooled engine, motorcycle, generator, lawnmower, ATV. That's my thought, and that's what we're doing. Because I believe that if you use the current oil that's been around for about 10 years, API service category SN, you will damage those types of engines. Kyle?
Yeah, I totally agree, Vince. They have finally maneuvered it down with the letters and everything to where they've got the worst possible oil and the maximum profit they can make. That's all it's about. It has nothing to do with protecting your engine or actually protecting your investment or anything else. The same thing is true with gasoline. If you can get a hold of non-ethanol premium oil, that's all you should be running in ATVs, air-cooled engines, chainsaws, you name it. There is a product also out there, and it's called StarTron, that you can add to your, if you have to, all you can get is ethanol gas. You can add this to the ethanol gas, and they say that it will mitigate the damage that can be done from ethanol gasoline. So that's
I have some vintage vehicles. We've got a collection. Instead of cash in the savings account, we've put some of our savings into older automobiles. So I have a 1979 Porsche that we've been saving. It was owned by H. Ross Perot, who ran for president. It's a 1979 Porsche 928 V8, and the fuel system is clogged because ethanol fuel. So I've got to clean that out. Got an old Ferrari, terrible vehicle, just like the one they used in Magnum PI. Clogged fuel system, ethanol fuel. You're absolutely right, and I'm livid about it. I'm absolutely livid that I never would have had these problems if it weren't for the ethanol that was forced on us by our alleged representatives who made us use corn for fuel, ridiculous. Worse mileage, worse miles per gallon, more damage to the engine and fuel system. Thank you to our alleged representatives. They're a bunch of bozos. They don't know what they're doing unless they've done it intentionally. Kyle, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Ben.